The morning sun cast long shadows across the ornate corridors of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla made her way to the private dining room. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor with determined precision, each step echoing her growing frustration with the recent developments within the royal family. The palace staff moved quietly around her, their eyes averted, sensing the tension that had been building for weeks. Camilla had always prided herself on her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of the royal household. Since marrying King Charles, she had worked tirelessly to establish her position and gain the respect that she felt was rightfully hers as queen consort. However, recent events had tested even her considerable patience and diplomatic skills. The source of her current displeasure was Prince William, the heir to the throne, whose recent decisions and public statements had begun to undermine what Camilla saw as the carefully constructed harmony within the royal family. William had been making subtle but pointed comments during public engagements about the need for authentic leadership and staying true to royal traditions, remarks that many interpreted as veiled criticisms of Camilla's influence on the king. As she entered the dining room, Camilla found herself reflecting on the series of events that had led to this moment. It had begun 3 weeks earlier when William had publicly supported a charity initiative that directly contradicted a project that Camilla had been championing. The media had been quick to pick up on the apparent disagreement, running stories about divisions within the royal family and speculation about power struggles behind palace doors. The breakfast meeting she was heading to had been arranged ostensibly to discuss upcoming royal engagements, but Camilla knew that the real purpose was to address the growing tension between herself and William. She had requested that Captain James Morrison, one of the senior royal guards and a man she had come to trust implicitly, be present during the meeting. Morrison had served the royal family for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for his unwavering loyalty and discretion. Captain Morrison stood at attention near the dining room entrance as Camilla approached. His military bearing was impeccable, his uniform pressed to perfection, but those who knew him well could detect the slight tension in his shoulders. He had been briefed on the delicate nature of the morning's discussion and understood that his role would be more than ceremonial. The relationship between Morrison and the queen consort had developed gradually over the years. Initially, their interactions had been purely professional, limited to security briefings and protocol discussions. However, as Camilla had faced various challenges in establishing her role within the royal family, she had come to value Morrison's honest assessments and his ability to provide her with insights into the mood and opinions of both the palace staff and the broader security team. Morrison had grown up in a military family and had joined the army straight from school. His career had been distinguished, marked by several tours of duty in challenging locations and commendations for his leadership skills. When he had been recruited to join the Royal Protection Detail, it had been seen as a natural progression for someone with his background and temperament. The transition from military service to royal duty had required adjustments, but Morrison had adapted quickly to the unique demands of protecting the royal family. What set Morrison apart from many of his colleagues was his ability to read people and situations with remarkable accuracy. This skill had made him invaluable in his role as a royal guard, but it had also led to his developing strong opinions about the various members of the royal family and their staff. Over time, he had become increasingly convinced that Camilla was not receiving the respect and support she deserved from other family members, particularly Prince William. The dining room where the meeting was to take place was one of the smaller, more intimate spaces within the palace. Its walls were adorned with portraits of previous monarchs, and the morning light streaming through the tall windows created an atmosphere that was both regal and welcoming. A table had been set for 3, with fine china and crystal glasses that caught and reflected the sunlight. Prince William arrived precisely at the appointed time, his demeanor formal but cordial. He greeted Camilla with the appropriate respect due to her position, but there was a coolness in his manner that was impossible to ignore. The initial pleasantries were exchanged with practiced ease, both parties well versed in the art of royal diplomacy, but underneath the polite surface, tensions were clearly simmering. As they took their seats, Morrison positioned himself near the door, close enough to observe and intervene if necessary, but far enough away to maintain the pretense that this was a private family discussion. His presence was a reminder of the serious nature of the meeting and the importance that Camilla placed on having a trusted ally present. The conversation began with routine matters, upcoming state visits, charity engagements, and family obligations. Both Camilla and William spoke with the measured tones and careful word choices that came naturally to them after years of public speaking and media scrutiny. However, it soon became apparent that neither was truly focused on these mundane topics. They were both waiting for the opportunity to address the real issues that had brought them together. The first crack in the diplomatic facade appeared when William mentioned his upcoming visit to a homeless shelter, a cause that had long been close to his heart. He spoke passionately about the need for the royal family to connect with ordinary people facing real struggles, and his words carried an implicit criticism of what he saw as Camilla's tendency toward more traditional, ceremonial royal duties. Camilla's response was measured but firm. She reminded William that the monarchy's strength had always come from its ability to represent stability and tradition, values that required a certain degree of formality and distance from everyday politics. Her words were carefully chosen, but the underlying message was clear. She believed that William's approach was potentially damaging to the institution they were all meant to serve. The exchange marked the beginning of a more direct and heated discussion. William expressed his view that the monarchy needed to evolve and adapt to remain relevant in the modern world. He spoke about his generation's understanding of social media, public relations, and the changing expectations of the British people. His tone remained respectful, but his words carried a clear challenge to Camilla's influence and approach. Camilla, for her part, defended her record and her understanding of royal duty. She pointed out that she had successfully navigated the transition from being a controversial figure to an accepted member of the royal family, a journey that required both patience and strategic thinking. She suggested that William's desire for rapid change could undo years of careful work to restore public confidence in the monarchy. As the discussion continued, both parties became more animated and less guarded in their language. The polite veneer of royal protocol began to slip, revealing the genuine frustration and disagreement that lay beneath. Morrison watched carefully, his training allowing him to assess the escalating tension and prepare for the possibility that his intervention might be required. The turning point came when William made a comment about the importance of earning respect rather than simply expecting it, a remark that Camilla interpreted as a direct attack on her legitimacy as queen consort. Her response was swift and sharp, pointing out that she had indeed earned her position through years of dedicated service and personal sacrifice. The temperature in the room seemed to rise as both parties abandoned their diplomatic restraint. Morrison found himself in an increasingly difficult position. His loyalty to Camilla was strong, and he had grown to believe that she was being unfairly treated by other members of the royal family. At the same time, his training and professional obligations required him to maintain neutrality and respect for all members of the royal family, including Prince William. The internal conflict created a tension that was visible in his rigid posture and carefully controlled expression. The argument reached a crescendo when William stood from his chair and began to speak more forcefully about his vision for the future of the monarchy. His words were not disrespectful, but they were direct and uncompromising in a way that was unusual for royal family discussions. He spoke about the need for transparency, accountability, and genuine connection with the people, values that he clearly felt were not being adequately represented by the current approach. Camilla's response was equally passionate. She rose from her own chair and began to speak about the sacrifices she had made and the challenges she had overcome to reach her current position. Her voice carried years of accumulated frustration and a determination to defend not only her own reputation but also the traditional values and approaches that she believed were essential to the monarchy's survival. The confrontation had moved far beyond the bounds of normal royal family discourse. Both parties were speaking with an honesty and directness that would have been impossible in a more public setting, but which revealed the depth of their disagreement and the personal stakes involved for each of them. Morrison watched as the situation continued to escalate, his mind racing through the possible outcomes and the actions he might need to take. His loyalty to Camilla was being tested against his professional obligations, and the conflict was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The stage was being set for a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The morning light that had seemed so welcoming at the beginning of the meeting now seemed harsh and unforgiving, highlighting the tension in the room and the impossible position that Morrison found himself occupying. The next few minutes would prove to be crucial in determining not only the immediate outcome of this confrontation but also the future relationships and power dynamics within the royal household. As the argument reached its peak, it became clear that this was more than just a disagreement about royal duties and approaches. It was a fundamental clash between different visions of what the monarchy should be and who had the right to shape its future direction. The consequences of this confrontation would extend far beyond the confines of the dining room and would ultimately involve not just Camilla and William, but also the loyal guard who had been watching and listening to every word. The tension in the ornate dining room had reached a breaking point. Captain Morrison stood frozen in his position near the door, watching as the heated exchange between Queen Camilla and Prince William escalated beyond anything he had witnessed in his 15 years of royal service. The carefully maintained facade of royal dignity was cracking, revealing raw emotions and fundamental disagreements that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. William's voice had taken on an edge of frustration as he continued to press his points about modernizing the monarchy. He spoke about the younger generation's expectations and the need for the royal family to demonstrate genuine relevance to contemporary British society. His gestures became more animated as he outlined his vision for a monarchy that was more accessible, more transparent, and more directly engaged with social issues. Camilla's response grew increasingly defensive. She felt that William was not only questioning her approach but also implicitly challenging her right to hold her position as queen consort. Years of fighting for acceptance and respect had made her sensitive to any perceived slights, and William's words struck at the heart of her deepest insecurities about her place within the royal family. The argument took a personal turn when William referenced the public's initial resistance to Camilla's role in the royal family and suggested that this history should make her more, rather than less, committed to proving her worth through meaningful action. The comment was delivered with clinical precision, but its impact was devastating. Camilla's face flushed with anger and hurt as she interpreted the remark as a deliberate attempt to undermine her confidence and authority. Morrison found himself caught between his professional duty to remain neutral and his personal loyalty to Camilla. He had watched her work tirelessly to build acceptance and respect within both the royal household and the broader public. In his view, William's comments were not only unfair but also potentially damaging to the stability that Camilla had worked so hard to establish. The queen consort's voice rose as she responded to William's challenge. She spoke passionately about her journey from a controversial figure to an accepted member of the royal family, emphasizing the personal costs and public scrutiny she had endured. Her words carried the weight of years of accumulated stress and the determination to defend not only her position but also her dignity. William, perhaps sensing that he had pushed too hard, attempted to moderate his tone. He acknowledged Camilla's contributions to the royal family while maintaining his position that significant changes were necessary to ensure the monarchy's future relevance. However, his attempt at conciliation came too late. The damage had been done, and Camilla was no longer interested in diplomatic solutions. The situation reached a critical moment when Camilla stood abruptly from her chair and delivered what could only be described as an ultimatum. She declared that she would not continue to tolerate what she saw as William's systematic attempts to undermine her authority and position. Her voice trembled with emotion as she outlined the choice that she believed William needed to make between supporting her as queen consort or continuing his campaign of subtle opposition. William's response was swift and decisive. He rejected the ultimatum entirely, stating that his loyalty was to the monarchy as an institution rather than to any individual's interpretation of how it should function. He declared his intention to continue advocating for the changes he believed were necessary, regardless of Camilla's objections. The directness of his refusal to back down marked the point of no return in their confrontation. Morrison watched in growing alarm as the exchange spiraled completely out of control. Both parties were now speaking with a candor and intensity that was unprecedented in his experience of royal family interactions. The formal protocols and careful language that normally governed such discussions had been abandoned entirely, replaced by raw emotion and unfiltered opinions. The critical moment arrived when Camilla turned toward Morrison and made a request that would change everything. Speaking directly to him for the first time during the meeting, she asked him to escort Prince William from the room. Her voice carried the authority of her position, but also a personal plea for support from someone she had come to trust and rely upon. Morrison felt the full weight of an impossible choice descending upon him. His training and professional ethics demanded that he respect the authority of all members of the royal family, including Prince William. However, his personal loyalty to Camilla and his belief that she was being unfairly treated created a powerful counter-pressure that was difficult to ignore. The seconds that followed seemed to stretch into eternity as Morrison weighed his options. He could refuse Camilla's request and maintain his professional neutrality, but doing so would likely be interpreted as a betrayal by someone who had come to rely on his support. Alternatively, he could comply with her request and risk the serious consequences that would inevitably follow from such an unprecedented action. Prince William watched this internal struggle with growing concern. He understood the position that Morrison was in and the loyalty that the guard felt toward Camilla. However, he also recognized that compliance with such a request would represent a fundamental breach of protocol that could not be overlooked or forgiven. The room fell silent as all three participants waited to see how Morrison would respond. The weight of history seemed to press down upon them as they stood at a crossroads that would determine not only their individual fates but also the future dynamics of power within the royal household. Morrison's decision, when it finally came, was delivered with the same military precision that characterized all his actions. He stepped forward and, addressing Prince William directly, suggested that it might be best if the prince concluded the meeting and returned to his other commitments. The words were carefully chosen to provide some semblance of diplomatic cover, but their intent was unmistakable. William's reaction was one of shocked disbelief. He had witnessed many unusual situations during his lifetime in the royal family, but he had never before been asked to leave a room by a member of the palace guard. The breach of protocol was so unprecedented that he initially seemed unsure how to respond. The prince's eventual response was measured but firm. He declined Morrison's suggestion and instead indicated his intention to continue the conversation with Camilla until they reached some form of resolution. His tone carried an implicit warning about the consequences of any attempt to force his departure. Morrison found himself in an even more difficult position. Having taken the initial step of supporting Camilla's request, he now faced the prospect of either backing down in humiliating fashion or escalating the situation further. His loyalty to Camilla and his personal sense of justice demanded that he continue to support her, even in the face of William's resistance. The guard's next action would later be described by witnesses as the moment when a family disagreement transformed into a full-scale crisis. Morrison moved closer to Prince William and repeated his suggestion that the prince leave the room, this time with a tone and manner that left no doubt about his seriousness. William's response was immediate and decisive. He rejected Morrison's authority to make such a demand and reminded the guard of his position as heir to the throne. The prince's words carried the full weight of royal authority and an implicit threat about the consequences of continued insubordination. Camilla watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and growing alarm. While she appreciated Morrison's loyalty and support, she was beginning to realize the magnitude of what was unfolding and the potential consequences for everyone involved. The situation had moved far beyond her original intentions and was now taking on a life of its own. The confrontation between Morrison and William continued to escalate as both men stood their ground. Morrison's military training and personal convictions were pitted against William's royal authority and institutional position. Neither was willing to back down, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Other palace staff members, alerted by the raised voices and unusual duration of the meeting, began to gather in the corridors outside the dining room. Word of the unprecedented confrontation spread quickly through the palace's informal communication networks, and senior officials started to mobilize in response to what was clearly becoming a serious crisis. The situation reached its peak when Morrison made the fateful decision to place his hand on William's arm in what could be interpreted as either a guiding gesture or a physical restraint. The contact lasted only a moment, but its significance was enormous. For the first time in modern royal history, a guard had made physical contact with an heir to the throne in what could be construed as a hostile or restraining manner. William's reaction to the physical contact was one of complete outrage. He pulled away from Morrison's touch and demanded an immediate explanation for what he characterized as an assault on his person. His voice carried a level of anger and indignation that reflected not only his personal affront but also his understanding of the constitutional implications of what had just occurred. Morrison realized immediately that he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The moment of physical contact had transformed what might have been dismissed as a heated argument into a serious breach of protocol that would require official investigation and response. His career, his reputation, and, quite possibly his freedom now hung in the balance. Camilla found herself in the impossible position of being both grateful for Morrison's loyalty and horrified by the consequences of his actions. She had wanted support in her confrontation with William, but she had never intended for the situation to escalate to the point of physical contact between a guard and the heir to the throne. The aftermath of Morrison's action was swift and decisive. William immediately called for additional security personnel and demanded that Morrison be placed under immediate detention pending a full investigation. His authority as heir to the throne could not be ignored, and, within minutes, other guards had entered the room to take Morrison into custody. As Morrison was led away, he maintained his composure and dignity, but the weight of what he had done was clearly visible in his expression. His loyalty to Camilla had led him to make a choice that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, consequences that were only beginning to become clear as the immediate crisis unfolded into a larger institutional challenge that would test the very foundations of royal protocol and authority. The aftermath of Captain Morrison's unprecedented action sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace that reverberated far beyond the ornate walls of the dining room where the confrontation had taken place. Within hours, what had begun as a private family disagreement had transformed into a constitutional crisis that threatened to expose deep divisions within the royal household and challenge fundamental assumptions about royal protocol and authority. News of the incident spread with remarkable speed through the palace's complex network of staff, advisors, and officials. Senior members of the royal household found themselves grappling with a situation unlike anything in their collective experience. The physical contact between a royal guard and the heir to the throne represented not just a breach of protocol but a challenge to the very foundations of the monarchy's traditional power structure. King Charles was informed of the crisis within an hour of its occurrence. The monarch's reaction was one of profound shock and concern, both for the immediate implications of what had happened and for the longer-term damage that could result from public knowledge of such a serious breach of royal protocol. Emergency meetings were convened, and trusted advisors were summoned to help navigate the unprecedented situation. Prince William, meanwhile, had retreated to his private quarters to consider his response to what he viewed as an unforgivable assault on his person and position. The physical contact from Morrison had been brief, but its symbolic significance was enormous. As heir to the throne, William's person was considered sacred, and any unauthorized physical contact represented not just a personal affront but a constitutional violation. The prince's immediate reaction was to demand Morrison's immediate dismissal and criminal prosecution for assault. He viewed the guard's actions as an unacceptable escalation that could not be overlooked or minimized, regardless of the circumstances that had led to the confrontation. William's position was supported by constitutional law and centuries of royal precedent, making his demands difficult to ignore or circumvent. Camilla found herself in an increasingly isolated and difficult position as the full magnitude of the crisis became apparent. Her initial gratitude for Morrison's loyalty was now overshadowed by the realization that his actions had created a situation that could potentially destroy not only his career but also her own carefully constructed position within the royal family. The Queen Consort's immediate challenge was to find a way to distance herself from Morrison's actions without appearing to abandon someone who had acted out of loyalty to her. The political calculations were complex and fraught with danger, as any misstep could be interpreted as either betrayal or complicity in what was being characterized as an assault on the heir to the throne. Royal advisors worked frantically behind the scenes to contain the crisis and prevent it from becoming public knowledge. The palace's press office prepared carefully worded statements designed to minimize the significance of any potential leaks while legal experts examined the constitutional and criminal law implications of Morrison's actions. The broader implications of the crisis extended far beyond the immediate participants. Other members of the Royal Guard found themselves under scrutiny as questions were raised about their loyalty and the adequacy of their training in handling sensitive family dynamics. The incident highlighted potential weaknesses in the security protocols that governed royal family interactions and raised uncomfortable questions about the personal relationships between guards and the family members they were meant to protect. Morrison himself was placed in a secure holding area within the palace while investigations began into his conduct and mental state. The guard maintained his composure throughout the initial questioning, but the weight of his actions and their consequences was clearly taking a toll. His 15 years of distinguished service now seemed irrelevant in the face of the momentous breach of protocol he had committed. The guard's motivation remained a central question in the investigation. Palace officials struggled to understand how a veteran security professional with an impeccable record could have made such a catastrophic error in judgment. Some suggested that Morrison had been suffering from stress or personal problems that had affected his decision-making abilities, while others pointed to his unusually close relationship with Queen Camilla as a contributing factor. Legal experts consulted by the palace confirmed that Morrison's actions could indeed be prosecuted as assault under British law, regardless of his intentions or the circumstances that had led to the confrontation. The fact that the victim was the heir to the throne added additional layers of legal complexity and ensured that any prosecution would be handled at the highest levels of the criminal justice system. The constitutional implications were equally serious. The monarchy's authority rested partly on the principle that royal persons were inviolate and that any unauthorized contact with them represented a fundamental challenge to the established order. Morrison's actions had created a precedent that could potentially be cited by future critics of royal authority or by individuals seeking to justify their own inappropriate behavior toward royal family members. Public relations experts brought in to manage the crisis warned that news of the incident could have devastating consequences for the monarchy's public image. The British people's acceptance of the royal family was built on respect for tradition, dignity, and proper protocol. A story about physical confrontations and security breaches within the palace itself could seriously undermine public confidence in the institution's stability and competence. The investigation into Morrison's conduct was expanded to include a comprehensive review of his background, psychological state, and relationships within the royal household. Security experts examined whether his actions represented an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern of inappropriate behavior that had somehow been overlooked by the palace's oversight mechanisms. Camilla's role in the crisis became increasingly scrutinized as investigators sought to understand the dynamics that had led to such an unprecedented breach of protocol. Questions were raised about her relationship with Morrison and whether she had somehow encouraged or enabled his inappropriate loyalty to her personal interests over his professional obligations to the royal family as a whole. The Queen Consort's position became even more precarious when investigators discovered that she had maintained regular private conversations with Morrison that went beyond the normal scope of security briefings. These interactions, while not necessarily inappropriate in themselves, suggested a level of personal relationship that raised questions about professional boundaries and the potential for conflicts of interest. King Charles found himself in the extraordinarily difficult position of mediating between his wife and his son while also protecting the broader interests of the monarchy. The monarch's personal relationships with both parties made it impossible for him to remain completely neutral, but his constitutional responsibilities demanded that he find a solution that preserved the integrity of the royal institution. The king's advisors recommended a comprehensive response that would address both the immediate crisis and the underlying issues that had contributed to its occurrence. This approach would require significant changes to palace security protocols, staff training programs, and the procedures governing interactions between royal family members and their protective details. Meanwhile, Prince William continued to press for decisive action against Morrison and for acknowledgement that the guard's actions represented an unacceptable assault on his person and position. The prince's demands were supported by legal precedent and constitutional principle, making them difficult to dismiss or minimize without creating additional problems for the monarchy's authority and credibility. The pressure on Camilla intensified as evidence mounted that her relationship with Morrison had been more personal and extensive than initially acknowledged. Palace officials discovered that the guard had been granted unusual access to the Queen Consort's private schedule and had participated in meetings and events that were typically restricted to senior household staff and advisors. Further investigation revealed that Morrison had developed strong opinions about the treatment of Queen Camilla by other family members and had expressed these views to colleagues within the security detail. His loyalty to Camilla had apparently blinded him to the constitutional implications of his position and had led him to view his role as protecting her not just physically but also politically and personally. The discovery of Morrison's extensive personal investment in Camilla's success and reputation provided crucial insight into his motivation for the unprecedented action he had taken during the confrontation with Prince William. It also raised serious questions about the queen consort's judgment in allowing such a relationship to develop and her understanding of the potential consequences of encouraging such personal loyalty from palace staff. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the crisis represented more than just an isolated incident involving a single guard's poor judgment. The underlying tensions between Camilla and William that had led to the confrontation remained unresolved, and the institutional weaknesses that had allowed Morrison's inappropriate loyalty to develop still needed to be addressed. The palace faced the daunting task of managing multiple interconnected crises simultaneously: the immediate legal and constitutional issues raised by Morrison's assault on Prince William, the broader questions about Queen Camilla's role and relationships within the royal household, and the fundamental challenges to royal protocol and authority that the incident had exposed. Senior advisors warned that the resolution of these issues would require not just disciplinary action against Morrison but also significant changes to the way the royal household managed relationships between family members and staff. The traditional assumptions about loyalty, authority, and appropriate behavior had all been called into question by the events in the dining room, and new frameworks would need to be developed to prevent similar crises in the future. The stage was set for a resolution that would have far-reaching consequences for all the participants and would fundamentally alter the dynamics of power and authority within the royal family. The choices made in the coming days would determine not only the fate of Captain Morrison and the future of Queen Camilla's position but also the monarchy's ability to maintain its authority and credibility in the face of unprecedented challenges to its traditional protocols and assumptions. The resolution of the unprecedented crisis at Buckingham Palace came after a week of intensive negotiations, legal consultations, and soul-searching that reached the highest levels of the British establishment. The final outcome would reshape relationships within the royal family and establish new precedents for how such conflicts would be handled in the future. King Charles, after consulting with constitutional experts, legal advisors, and senior members of Parliament, made the difficult decision to personally oversee the resolution of the crisis. The monarch recognized that the situation required decisive action that balanced respect for royal protocol with acknowledgement of the complex human dynamics that had contributed to the unprecedented breach of security. The king's first major decision concerned Captain Morrison's fate. Despite intense pressure from Prince William's supporters to pursue criminal charges for assault, Charles ultimately chose a different path. Morrison was dismissed from royal service immediately and permanently, but criminal prosecution was avoided through a carefully negotiated agreement that included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and Morrison's acceptance of full responsibility for his actions. Morrison's dismissal was accompanied by the forfeiture of all benefits and honors associated with his royal service, effectively erasing 15 years of distinguished career advancement. The former guard's acceptance of these terms was seen as an acknowledgement of the severity of his breach of protocol and his understanding that his actions had created consequences that extended far beyond his personal situation. The decision to avoid criminal prosecution was controversial and faced criticism from constitutional experts who argued that it set a dangerous precedent for future challenges to royal authority. However, King Charles and his advisors determined that the public spectacle of a criminal trial would cause more damage to the monarchy's reputation than the current approach, which allowed for swift resolution while maintaining some degree of institutional dignity. Prince William's response to the resolution was one of grudging acceptance rather than satisfaction. While he had achieved his primary goal of seeing Morrison removed from royal service, he felt that the absence of criminal prosecution sent the wrong message about the inviolability of royal persons and the consequences of challenging royal authority. The prince's concerns were acknowledged but not acted upon, creating a source of ongoing tension within the family. The most significant consequences of the crisis, however, were reserved for Queen Camilla herself. The investigation into her relationship with Morrison had revealed a pattern of behavior that palace officials characterized as inappropriate and potentially damaging to the monarchy's institutional integrity. Her encouragement of Morrison's personal loyalty and her failure to maintain appropriate professional boundaries had contributed directly to the crisis. King Charles faced perhaps the most difficult decision of his reign in determining how to address his wife's role in the crisis. The monarch's personal loyalty to Camilla was in direct conflict with his constitutional responsibilities and the need to maintain the monarchy's credibility and authority. The resolution he ultimately chose reflected both his love for his wife and his understanding of the broader institutional requirements. Camilla was required to issue a formal public apology acknowledging her errors in judgment and accepting responsibility for her role in creating the conditions that led to Morrison's unprecedented breach of protocol. The apology was carefully crafted to express genuine remorse while avoiding language that could be interpreted as admission of criminal wrongdoing or constitutional violation. More significantly, Camilla agreed to a substantial reduction in her official duties and public responsibilities for a period of 6 months. This temporary withdrawal from public life was presented as a period of reflection and personal growth, but it was understood by all parties as a form of institutional punishment for her role in the crisis. The reduction in duties was accompanied by changes to her staff and security arrangements designed to prevent similar relationships from developing in the future. The Queen Consort's acceptance of these terms was seen as an acknowledgement of the seriousness of the situation and her understanding that her position within the royal family, while secure, was not beyond accountability. The public nature of her punishment sent a clear message about the monarchy's commitment to appropriate behavior and professional standards, even when it involved senior family members. The broader implications of the resolution extended throughout the royal household and security apparatus. Comprehensive reviews were conducted of all security protocols, staff training programs, and procedures governing interactions between royal family members and palace employees. New guidelines were established to prevent the development of inappropriate personal relationships between family members and staff. All members of the Royal Protection Detail were required to undergo additional training focused on professional boundaries, constitutional principles, and conflict resolution. The training emphasized the importance of maintaining neutrality in family disputes and the absolute requirement to respect the authority of all royal family members regardless of personal feelings or loyalties. The palace also implemented new oversight mechanisms designed to identify and address potential problems before they could escalate to crisis levels. Regular psychological evaluations were mandated for all security personnel, and new reporting procedures were established to ensure that concerns about staff behavior or family dynamics could be addressed promptly and appropriately. Prince William's relationship with his stepmother remained strained following the resolution of the crisis, but both parties committed to maintaining the public facade of family unity that was essential to the monarchy's stability. Private family meetings were restructured to include neutral facilitators, and new protocols were established to prevent future confrontations from escalating beyond manageable levels. The public's response to the carefully managed revelation of the crisis was mixed but generally supportive of the monarchy's handling of the situation. The palace's transparency about the incident and its commitment to implementing reforms were seen as evidence of institutional maturity and accountability. However, some critics argued that the monarchy's tendency towards self-regulation rather than external oversight remained problematic. Media coverage of the incident was extensive but carefully controlled through strategic leaks and official briefings designed to shape public perception of the events and their resolution. The palace's public relations team worked to frame the crisis as an isolated incident that had been handled appropriately rather than evidence of broader institutional problems or family dysfunction. Morrison's post-dismissal life proved to be extremely difficult. The comprehensive non-disclosure agreement prevented him from discussing his experiences or defending his actions publicly, while his association with the royal crisis made finding alternative employment nearly impossible. The former guard's fall from respected security professional to unemployable pariah served as a stark warning to other palace staff about the consequences of inappropriate loyalty or poor judgment. The long-term impact of the crisis on Queen Camilla's position within the royal family remained to be seen, but early indications suggested that her influence and authority had been permanently diminished. Her reduced schedule of public duties continued beyond the initially agreed 6-month period, and her role in family decision-making was significantly curtailed. King Charles's handling of the crisis was generally praised for its balance of personal loyalty and institutional responsibility, but the monarch's relationship with his son remained complicated by their different perspectives on the appropriate resolution of the conflict. Prince William continued to believe that more decisive action should have been taken, while Charles maintained that the chosen approach had achieved the necessary goals while minimizing damage to the monarchy's reputation. The establishment of new protocols and oversight mechanisms represented a significant evolution in the monarchy's approach to managing internal conflicts and maintaining professional standards. The traditional assumption that royal family members and palace staff would naturally maintain appropriate relationships had been challenged by the crisis, leading to more formal and structured approaches to these interactions. The incident also highlighted the ongoing challenges facing the monarchy as it attempted to balance tradition with modernity, personal relationships with institutional requirements, and family loyalty with public accountability. The resolution of the Morrison crisis provided a template for handling similar situations in the future while acknowledging that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to adapt and evolve in response to changing circumstances and expectations. As the immediate aftermath of the crisis faded into history, all parties involved were left to contemplate the lessons learned and the permanent changes that had resulted from a single moment of poor judgment in a palace dining room. The incident served as a reminder that even the most established institutions were vulnerable to human weakness and that the price of maintaining authority and credibility required constant vigilance and the willingness to hold even the most powerful individuals accountable for their actions. The monarchy emerged from the crisis changed but intact, having demonstrated both its vulnerability to human error and its capacity for institutional adaptation and reform. The future would reveal whether the lessons learned and changes implemented would prove sufficient to prevent similar crises while preserving the essential character and authority that had sustained the institution through centuries of challenge and change.